What is the fastest growing church in the world? What country? Iran. In an article by Hudson.org titled God News from Iran, a million new Christian believers. There's a commentary written June 15th, 2023, not too long ago by LELA, GILBERT, saying Christianity is rapidly growing in Iran. Today, through this article, I want to show you that Christianity is not dead, but only changing geographically to where? To the east. And as my mentor, the late Dr. Norman GEISLER used to say, Christians are like tea. The best flavors come out when the water is the hottest. So let's get started. Welcome back to Reason for Truth. You know, truth comes first here. Reasons always come last, but we're always and constantly learning. So when we stop learning, we stop teaching, or at least stop teaching. Well, we don't want to be like so many people who just check out, don't think, and don't learn. So that's what this channel's about. Thank you for joining us. There's an explosive number of conversions of Christianity taking place in Iran. It's amazing where an Islamic government has ruled since 1979. And to the surprise of many, Christianity is flourishing, and the implications are potentially profound. I'd say no longer potentially, they just are profound. And the author writes, consider some testimonials. David Yegedzar of Elam Ministries stated in 2018 that the Iranians have become the most open people to the gospel. The Christian Broadcasting Network found also in 2018 that Christianity is growing faster in the Islamic Republic of Iran than any other country. So why is Christianity growing so rapidly in Iran? Well, this trend results from the extreme Shiite Islam theocracy imposed by the theocratic regime. And this was explained by an Iranian church leader back in 2019. And this is what he said. What if I told you that the mosques are empty inside Iran? What if I told you no one follows Islam inside of Iran? What if I told you that the best evangelist for Jesus was Ayatollah Khamenei, founder of Islamic Republic? Now, I think he's being facetious in saying all that, but confirming these statements, a significant survey taken in 2020 by Jaman, a secular Netherlands-based research group, reported that there are far greater numbers of Christian believers in Iran than ever before. So I think you have to take what he just said with more of a metaphorical saying. In other words, the church is growing and people are moving into more home churches. So more than 1 million, in fact. And in fact, those involved with the house church movement in Iran are convinced that they are likely probably more than 1 million, probably several million Christian believers there. It's hard to, you can't track them. The government would love to, but they're just private. They're kind of undercover in the home. So evangelism is alive and well, but done more quietly in Iran. Obviously, we can expect that. But new Christians witness to other Christians through quiet conversations, encouraged in low-profile online Bible studies, and listen, they're affirmed by visions and dreams and miraculous answered prayers. We see that a lot in the Middle East. As I always say, listen, there's no such thing as a closed country. Once you say, oh, these are the closed countries to the gospel, well, that's when Jesus shows up in different ways, which is he walks through walls as pure spirit, and he just comes to people in dreams. So, but listen, due to their risky circumstances of being a Christian in Iran, recent Christian converts are really understandably enthusiastically communicating about their changed lives with friends and loved ones and people they know or trust at least, but quietly and carefully. You have to be. However, there's a discreet but persistent witness accounts for the extraordinary number, by the way, of new Iranian believers who meet in small house churches. I read an article some years ago. They say the average house church was 5 people. Obviously, that's changing. Church is growing. It says these house churches now are typically comprised of no more than maybe 10 or 15 believers, which last article I read a couple years back, 2 years again, was 5 people. On any given day, they arrive one by one in a small apartment or some nondescript location, and after the last one enters, the door closes, it locks, and they simply take a deep breath, they relax, they greet each other warmly, I think much like in the Bible, with a hug and a kiss. I'm Italian. That makes sense to me. Makes sense. Doesn't make any sense not to be that way. Biblical and Italian. Great. Okay, I'll say one of the same, but, playing on the edge there. But to be honest with you, listen, I'm jealous of the authentic Christian faith that these people are are experiencing their sincere fellowship through the Persian brand of hospitality, I like to call it. A few minutes later, by the way, once everybody's in, and this little gathering begins, they sing quietly, very softly, and often accompanied by a quietly strummed guitar, acoustic guitar. They're cautious, obviously. They have to be, in not wanting their voices to be heard beyond the apartment, walls, which are very thin. But soon, with closed eyes, hands lifted heavenward, they're lost in praise, man, worshiping and fellowship. And later, teaching comes from biblical passages offered, and communion service takes place. And finally, after more conversation, fellowship, they leave one by one, just the way they came. Now, listen, this entails a lot of risk, and the risk is high. So some of the house churches have continued for years without intrusion by government authorities, while others have been discovered and experienced devastating consequences. Sudden invasions by the state authorities can happen really at any time. That's very dangerous. Everybody knows about Christian gatherings in which, without warning, a dozen or more officials bust in, obviously military, police. They bust up the meeting. They arrest everybody. Typically, these authorities they'll tear apart the residence, the house, searching for laptops, phones, evangelical publications, including Bibles and other books, DVDs, videos, whatever they can get their hand on. That's why a lot of times our podcast is downloaded the thumbnail. So you could say, hey, I got 1,000 downloads on this particular episode. Well, that could be 100,000 or more that are actually listening or watching. But listen, what are they looking for? They're looking for anything they can confiscate and label as evidence against the Christians. Arrests are made based on accusations such as insulting Islam or conducting deviant activity that contradicts or interferes with the sacred law of Islam. Now, those in the house church in Iran include recent converts. They know very well that the aftermath of such raids can also be perilous to their mental and physical health. Threats of violence, lost employment, expulsion from school, university, confiscation of their cash and money, and endangerment of their family members. And everybody knows that sexual violence against mothers, wives, and girlfriends or daughters is likely to follow. That's very scary. Still, with all this in mind, Iranian house churches, Christians, are extraordinarily courageous, and sometimes the price they pay for their boldness is exceptionally painful. We need to be praying for these people. Listen, prominent organizations who report on Iran's abuse of Christian believers include the Vatican. Several Protestant groups declare that the regime has recently increased its abuses, including surveillance, arrests, and imprisonment of house church leaders, including those who worship in their homes. Sadly, true justice seldom follows. You got the fox, managing the hen house. The fox is not going to tell on other foxes. The ministry, Open Doors, you may have heard of them, founded by Brother Andrew. Love that guy. Got to read his books. They acknowledge that their watchdog organization is appalled by the testimonial violence due to process takes place in courtrooms, including humiliating remarks from the judge on Christians. Not supposed to be. Judge supposed to be, he's supposed to be neutral, but that doesn't work that way. Not in Iran. Also, you're appalled by the court's concealed favor for the prosecutor side, the defendant's occasional lack of access even to a lawyer, and verdicts issued in less than 10 days, right? Clearly without sufficient consideration of the evidence. Now, listen, Iran is sending out evangelists to Afghanistan. This is crazy. So despite all this, the church is growing, and now Iranians are going out to Afghanistan. Their neighboring Afghanistan rivals Iran as the fastest growing church. They're starting to grow. They may pass up Iran. And Iraq is growing too. And Turkey. We'll talk about that in another episode. But listen, they're influenced by none other than the Iranian Christians whose similar language. Listen, the Afghans are very similar to the Iranian in their language, their culture, their food, and they built bridges and connections for the spread of the gospel. This is awesome. God used the Armenian, the Chaldean, and the Assyrian churches, by the way, as a source of light, especially in the early years after the revolution, for Iranians who became disillusioned with the Islamic Republic and who were searching for answers. Though these communities number inside the country and dwindled down to maybe 100,000, the number of new Iranian converts has surprised it as much as perhaps jumping 10 times that number. So Christianity's growing in Iran, folks, through believers simply telling their friends and family about their newfound faith. House church movements have begun all over Iran and started to explode, providing deep fellowship that have helped many Iranian believers to remain firm in their faith among great persecution. So these converts, by the way, come from all sectors of society, from street vendors to taxi drivers to intellectuals, artists, even public servants in some cases. They can't talk about that, but that's amazing. House churches, online, media, gospel programs, and person-to-person connections continue to be conduits for the spread of the gospel and all over the country there in Iran. So while persecution has threatened to eliminate Christianity from Iran, the opposite happened, and that persecution only seemed to spur the growth of the church. See, remember, Christians are like tea. Best flavors come out when the water is the hottest. In other words, Christianity atrophies and declines in the good and easy and recreational times, but it grows in difficult times of persecution. So what? Listen, the lesson and example for you and I today is that despite the abuses suffered by our brothers and sisters in Iran, we should be awestruck by their faith. Their courage, their boldness, and by the remarkable results of their steadfast faith. It's evident by the fact that there are more than 1 million new converts. That's amazing. Called Muslim background believers. I've heard this before, MBBs. These MBBs are reading the Bible for the first time, praying, gathering in small groups, and sharing their new faith with friends, family. Despite all the risks, their faith is amazing, encouraging, and inspiring. So folks, how we see Iran, we hear about them in the news all the time, but it ought to be very different than what we see in the media headlines. So today when we see Iran in the headlines, war this, war that, we'd be wise to be concerned. Also, let's pray for God's intervention in the regime's deadly intentions, but let's also remember, little known, rapidly growing family, in Christ inside the Iranian borders. Their bold example of courage in the face of persecution shines brightly, it should, among the ever-increasing darkness in the Middle East. So in conclusion, I want to encourage you to rejoice in that the church is growing throughout the world. While the state of the church in America may be declining or falling apart to some degree, God will not be stopped. Christianity never grows in good times, but through the persecution and tough times. So as we in the West take somewhat, I would say, a great part of our religion for granted. People often don't even go to church every week, or have to go to church at all. We ought not do that. Our Christian faith is no exception to any time in history. We need to be praying for our brothers and sisters and for America, praying for our brothers and sisters in Iran, the Middle East. They're stepping up. As Christians, we should be jealous of them because their faith is real, valuable, very vibrant, and very joyful. So as we read the headlines, let's not be in despair. Why? Because the great news is that Christianity is not dead in the world. Again, it's only changing geographically to the east. And remember the words of my dear friend and mentor, the late Dr. Norman Geisler. Christians are like tea. The best flavors come out when the water is the hottest. Well, in America here, the United States, telling you right now, the water's getting hot. The best flavors are just starting to come out. So hopefully we can turn this country around. But in the interim, listen, God's moving, even in China, Turkey, the Middle East. I think you're going to see in our children's generation, Christian influence is going to flip. And so that's just my thought about it. So let's just pray that the West hangs tight, comes back to God for Jesus Christ in the interim. See what God does. That's what I say. Hey, listen, if you're out there, you're in one of these countries, Iran, you're in Iraq, you're in Afghanistan, you're anywhere, China, and you want a free course, you reach out to me on the contact tab on reasonfortruth.org. I'll send you. Go to equippedacademy.com, pick out a course. I'm going to send it to you for free. We just need to authenticate you at some level, and then we'll make sure we get that out to you. So God's blessings. Hey, before you leave, make sure you do a couple things. Make sure you check out my community. You can do that internationally as well as StephenGarofalo.com. But this is what I really want you to do. I want you to share this with others. This is great news. Also, want you to make sure you like this. This help us uptick and more people will see it, get encouraged, and then make sure you subscribe. You won't miss any more of them. So listen, appreciate you tuning in today. I'm your host, Stephen Garofalo. Stay in prayer. This is your Reason for Truth for today.